Pam Richardson to come forward for the Banks Peninsula Community Board. And could we begin with the Allandale Transport Yard site? So rather than dealing with your report first, if we could move to your Part A report item number 7, Allandale Transport Yard site.
So could, yes, very happy to do that, but want to remind the Council of what the Reserve Management Committee, just very briefly about what the Reserve Management Committees are. There are 15 of them across the peninsula. Allandale is just one of them. Robinson's Bay, the other issue that we've got in our report this morning, or it's got a good outcome. So they all have issues around they don't actually get any funding to support them to do some of their work. Some of them do, a number of them do, like the Cairns Bay Camping Ground, the Devotials Camping Ground, the Pigeon Bay Camping Ground, and there are others that receive a little bit of funding. Awiti receives a little bit of funding as well that help those reserve management committees do their work. So the reserve management committees enable communities to make decisions about their own local reserves, you know, by having direct input. And Stuart and Dennis actually talked about that. If people are interested in doing things, so they have to have a little bit of money so they can do things. But they are ultimately accountable to the council, or to the community board and to the council. They're all different, and some of them have several parcels of land. But at the moment, we're actually going through a program of reviewing the policies and developing that. It is taking some time. These reserve management committees are very old. They go back to, you know, before perhaps Banks Peninsula District Council days, earlier district councils that were involved in those reserve areas. So we are working in a new, looking at coming up with some new guidance for reserve management committees. So just moving on to the Part A around that reserve area.
Right. So Andrew, would you like to move the recommendation of the community board, yep, which is the one that we have in front of us there? Do I have a seconder for that?
Yep.
Rab? Any questions or discussion? Yep.
Yeah, just wanted to check two things. One is I was concerned that money from here could go to the other reserve management committees, so don't know how you want to deal with that. And the second question I had was, in the report there's quite a lot of talk about they can't have existing use rights. Is Fulton Hogan proposing to do something quite significantly different, or is it, I mean, I was just trying to understand if there's any concern over what could possibly go there.
No, I'm not aware of anything, but no, Andrew, are you aware of anything? Joan?
No, the existing use rights are really hard to obtain, and so the council decided that they couldn't work out the number of traffic movements.
Yeah, that's what the report's very clear about that.
Yeah, so therefore existing use rights could not be done. But Fulton Hogan will be doing, it's a yard where they've got tractors and trucks and stuff. It's the same use as was before, but the responsibility is on them if it turns out that they have to get a consent.
Right, but there'll be protections built in around the scale of activity that could happen if we lease it to them.
I am unclear about that, but I would assume there would have to be.
Okay.
On a positive note, Pam, this council has been saying that we want our communities to take over the areas and take responsibility for them. In the Banks Peninsula area, that's probably more prevalent than a lot of other areas. Would you say that allowing this community, this reserves group, to have this income to put back into this and be left alone to do what they can do for their community and be of value to the wider city?
Look, I'm totally in favour of that. We're working on resilience and sustainability for our communities, and this is part of it. So they need to be part of, allowed to make those decisions and have a little bit of funding to help them move forward.
So if this funding was decided to not go to them and go into the big pool, the odds are that, as these gentlemen said, that there'd be the moral of this group would go down, the morale, of this group would go down, and also the only other funding they could go for is back to council, so it'll go back into a bureaucratic process which takes so much time and energy and loses a lot of money in that process. So we're better to leave them alone. They know what they're doing.
Not leave them alone.
No,
we'll all work alongside them to make sure we all get the best outcomes for our community and for the community board and the council. It is achievable, and as I said, we are developing new policy to go around these, so that all the reserve management committees are working on a similar sort of footing.
So their vision for this particular area fits in with, say, the Governor's Bay with regards to the walk that goes through from the pier?
It will eventually.
And okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, Phil.
Thanks, Pam. Actually, that was sort of my question, really, because you've got the Governor's Bay Wharf, if I recall, and then there's a track around which goes pretty close to Allandale, maybe, and it's a cycling walking track. I'm just wondering, how can perhaps we as a council support the links to the hall, perhaps through our parks? That's one question, because it's a popular walking track.
Yeah, there are a number of there's the head-to-head walkway that goes through there as well. But with this particular reserve management committee will have a reserve management plan that will be drawn up with them and with the community. Right. So all of those things can actually be brought into it.
And thanks, Pam. The other part too we're clearly interested in is the strong history and historical aspect of the building and the area. So if there's a way for us as council in terms of funding to have some historic link, for this area. So in fact,
yes, no, it's a vital area, and I see that you have got the booklet, head to the head of the harbour upstairs. Have a look at that, and that will be in that. So it is a very important, and of course we've got Living Springs just adjacent to that area as well. So which is used by a lot of young, all sorts of groups go to Living Springs to rejuvenate themselves, do all sorts of things. So it's great that we've actually got a good hall down there as well, and a reserve area that can also be considered.
Yep. Mike?
Thanks, Pam. I support the money going back to the Reserve Management Committee. But Yanni asked a question, I'm not too sure if it was actually answered, about your last part of your recommendation for 3 about it actually being potentially partially allocated to other Reserve Management Committees. What's the rationale behind that? Because obviously that could dilute the money going to the people that are actually paying it to start.
Well, as I said, it's part of reviewing and developing the new policy going forward. It's just a suggestion. It needs to be worked through, and developing that new policy, it will be worked through with the community to, with that particular community to achieve that. So it's not in black and white at the moment, but it may be a consideration down the track. But it's
interesting because obviously it's not a massive amount of money, and you've got a very, very big community board area, and it could get spread right across, and actually, when you're that small to start with, it starts to just become crumbs, and it doesn't really achieve what probably is needed at the with this committee.
Andrew, have you got any comments?
Well, given that the review is going to come back to council for a decision, ultimately, isn't it?
Well, it'll come back to the community board, will make the review.
But won't the review then be reported through to us for a decision?
It will ultimately be.
Well, why don't we just take out all the words after reserve, so that it's or, so take out or partially allocated to other reserve management committees at the discretion of the community board. Just in the meantime, because I mean, if this has really been put in there as a holding position because of the review, why not make that commitment now? The community know exactly what, or the committee knows exactly what they can now expect, and then then they know that they're going to be getting $14,500.
Yeah, be very happy with that.
Yep. Sorry, just a question. Do we know how long the lease with Fulton Hogan is? It may be in the report. I haven't been able to find it, but well, because I mean, I was just from what we heard from the deputation. I mean, my preference would be to give them the income stream for 3 years or however long. I mean, I know the review's going on, but I just take on board the comments that were made. It's hard for them to plan when we're expecting all this work to be done with these volunteer reserve committees on a year-to-year basis. It would be much better, I personally think, if we could give them, a bit more time than that. But it is weird that we're being asked to approve a lease with no time frame that I can find in the resolution.
Andrew?
Yeah, the original staff recommendation had a recommendation that we approve the funding from the lease for a year. So regardless of the length of the lease, the original staff recommendation was that we approve the funding go to the Reserve Management Committee for a year. The reason the Community Board didn't take that was because there's no guarantee that the policy review will be completed within the year, so we didn't want to be back here making the same decision again, or the Community Board having the same debate again, just to extend the holding pattern, essentially. I think we need to be confident that the review will take into account the provisions of reserve management plans, the funding needs of the reserve management committees, respect the volunteer capability and all the work that's done. The reason we didn't want a specific timeline, whether that was 1 year or 3 years or what it might be, is because we need that policy review to take place and to be effective and to be able to be implemented. So we don't want any impediments in the way when we get to that point. And I think we need to be confident that the review and its recommendations and the Community Board decision making around that afterwards will take into account the needs of the reserve management committees and the work that they do. The reserve management committees are subcommittees of the Community Board. So, you know, the Community Board is intimately involved with what they do. There's a liaison person on each of the reserve management committees, including Allandale. I can't imagine the Community Board would be approving a policy position or any changes that that changed the outcomes.
How long is the lease for? That's a really simple question. Like, I just don't think it's good practice for us to agree to a lease without knowing the time frame.
How long the lease is for? It should say.
Justin Sun. We had
Okay.
expected that Bruce Rendell was here, but he doesn't seem to have.
Sorry?
Bruce Rendell was to be here to provide advice.
Yeah, he's on his way. He's out of the building. You want to hold that matter open until we get that advice? Yeah.
I don't see why we need a time frame. We can always address it through another resolution later. So I don't think that's sidetracking things personally.
If I may, usually truck and trailer that you have the time frame with the lease.
There was an earlier paper. This is the second paper, and I'm just not convinced that we weren't told what it was in the first paper, because I.
Mr. said that the staffing will be back soon, so we could hold this until they come back.
Yes, I know, but it's just a bit of a shame. Anyway, we'll just pop it on hold at the moment. We'll just come back to it in a minute. So if you'd like to turn to your report, Pam.
Right. Have we got